Imagine having been through so much trauma in your life that you don't know what rest feels like, you don't know how to rest. Stress responses are so chronically overactivated that you can't watch TV, can't read a book, can't sit still and rest. I was like that until I started floating. I was given the opportunity last year to speak on BBC South Today and BBC Radio Solent about how floating helps me. And then when Michael asked me if I'd like to make a short film, I jumped at the chance. I was thinking what to say and I just really didn't know how to start or where to start. And then I was thinking about poems that I used to write some 6-7 years ago. And I actually even went as far as just getting a book published just for my own use, with my poems in, some of them called An All-Consuming Darkness. On the back it says, "The darkness had swallowed up her fragile soul so much she forgot to notice how beautiful the moonlight was." I'm going to read you one of the poems. It's difficult to choose which one because they often contained similar themes about darkness, aloneness, nothingness. Bear in mind then that I hadn't even floated then, let alone even heard of floating. So I'll read you this one. It's both a blessing and a curse to feel everything so very deeply, to feel self-loathing, rock-bottom despair, contrasted with a realisation of love, for the sun shining, for life and for yourself, to feel inspired, relaxed and at peace, for the fear, dread and doom to dissipate, leaving ripples of hope and prosperity and well-being, for the darkness to fade and the light shine bright, for everything to appear in vibrant colours once again, instead of that dismal darkness, to notice the small things once again, like the birds singing and the wind rustling in the leaves. Spring has sprung, life has begun again. The sun sets, darkness falls, the sun rises and the light comes once again. When I wrote those poems all those years ago, little did I know that it would be the darkness, the aloneness, the nothingness of the float pod that would save me from the depth of despair. Today, the darkness is something that I'm drawn to in a positive way. Back then, it was an all-consuming darkness. I've been through a lot of trauma in my life and I've never had the appropriate help. However, I strongly believe that I wouldn't still be alive talking to you today if I hadn't discovered floating. Because of chronic stress and trauma I've been through, my sympathetic nervous system would have been in total overdrive most of my life, hence not knowing what rest felt like, not knowing how to rest and relax until I started floating. I also have a lot of chronic physical problems, and earlier this year, after a long fight, I got formally diagnosed with hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so rare connective tissue disorder. It affects my spine, some chronic pain issues, and causes some dysfunction of some of my internal organs, which make my daily life hugely difficult to deal with. Sadly, there's a tendency in society to give stigmatising, damaging labels to people who've been through trauma, to make them ask what's wrong with them, rather than to make them think what's happened to them. I used to be the person who constantly asked, why me? Why has so much bad stuff happened to me? I was very much in victim mentality. I used to be a very sceptical person, very cynical, used to think, oh, I won't try that because there's no point, because it won't work. That was part of the darkness that I was consumed by. However, I was desperate. I was searching for some relief. I've been through a lot of trauma in my life at the hands of other people, but several years ago I distinctly remember saying to someone that I felt the worst person to be afraid of was myself, the harm I could cause myself. So why would being alone in the darkness with myself be so healing and calming? Looking towards attachment theories and childhood development stages, I think trauma that I suffered as a small child meant that I never really learned how to regulate my nervous system. I never learned how to get my needs met from other people. I never really felt a sense of safety. When you tell people about floating, very common, as you'll know, excuses are things like, oh, I feel claustrophobic, or I'd be afraid to be with myself for an hour in the darkness. Just me. However, for me, I found it hugely beneficial, without the external stimuli, to get to know myself, to get to know Sarah, who I am, to get to know and appreciate and realise parts of me still exist that I thought had been taken away from me forever because of the experiences I've been through. Through interoception, I've got to know and appreciate some of the deepest, darkest recesses of my soul. For many years, I was blinded by the darkness and the notion of what should have happened in my life, the notion of how my life should have been. This constant feeling of feeling off. However, now I know that this was a misalignment and reflected the level of self-care I needed. Something at the time I hugely struggled with, the concept of self-care, because of my extreme self-hatred. The float pod has given me the space I needed, the space to tune into myself, to tune into what I need, to get to know myself. I've learnt how to check in with myself. I've learnt how to relax my nervous system. I've learnt how to get in touch with how I feel. Because of the trauma I've been through, I was always on the lookout for danger, very hypervigilant. A float pod is the safest place I've ever felt in my life. Just so happens that Michael contacted me about making this video on a day when I was going to contact him anyway, because we keep in touch occasionally, even though I haven't been to Pangbourne for a few years because Limitless Float opened in Southampton a couple of years ago. The day Michael contacted me, I was on the start of a 7-day float, and I thought that day that it's really strange how things happen at a certain time. And then it actually happened that the 7-day float turned into what was going to try and be a 30-day float, but I only made it to day 24 because of some of my chronic health problems. I've probably floated about 150 hours in 2 years now. The more you float, the more the benefits grow exponentially. I'm a firm believer of Peter Levine's work, somatic experiencing, and I'm a firm believer of embodiment and a bottom-up approach and methods to rebalance and recalibrate the nervous system and release the trauma stored in the body. I think floating is a vehicle that's guided me home, guided me to Sarah that was lost. Floating has woken up something deep inside of my soul. It's woken me up to what matters in life. It's opened my eyes, opened my ears. Because floating has opened up my inner and outer world so much, it's changed my perspective on myself, on the world around me. It's given me a sense of purpose and meaning. It's given me the capacity to trust in the universe, to trust in what is happening, to trust in holistic mind, body and spirit. I believe that deep within each of us there's an innate capacity to self-heal. The float pod has given me the tool to filter out the surplus, to get to know myself. It's given me the facility to permeate deep into the core of my being. It's opened up something within me, an opening that cannot be undone. The cynical, sceptical Sarah that I used to be now believes in the universe, to trust in what is happening. that there's a grand plan in life. Trauma made me so hypervigilant, I lost track of where I was going, of who I was. Floating has rekindled my passion for life. Even just seeing a picture of a float pod now has a hugely calming effect on me. Makes me wonder what benefit my mind, body and soul will get from my next float. It pains me how people laugh at the concept of floating and doing nothing for an hour. But now, on days when I float, the hour of nothingness is the most productive hour in my whole day. It's time when I am learning how to be Sarah.